It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Continuing California incinerations and now Gulf Coast blizzards. Fire and ice, none of it natural. So soon so many will ponder why they didn't see it coming. Why they didn't see the shockingly obvious, to anyone that isn't willfully blind, climate disruption operations taking place in our skies. Why they didn't notice the dying of the trees, the disappearing of the insects, and the vanishing of wildlife, along with the loss of our formerly blue skies. So many will soon wonder why they were so caught up in completely orchestrated, scripted political circus while weather and biological warfare raged on, taking an ever greater toll on humans, wildlife, and the planet's remaining life support systems. On that note, winter weather warfare. Early this week, while there was a blizzard warning in New Orleans, with snow also falling in Brownsville, Texas, which is right next door to Mexico, there were above freezing temperatures with rain, not snow, in Greenland, Iceland, Siberia, and Alaska. What's wrong with this picture? And where did the moisture come from that fueled the New Orleans blizzard? Straight off the record warm Gulf of Mexico. Seriously, please stop to ponder the scenario just described. A never-before-seen blizzard in New Orleans with above freezing temperatures and rain in Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, and Siberia. Meteorologically speaking, it's as wrong as it gets, but what was the non-stop narrative from climate engineering cover-up matrix media sources? Only the chemically cooled surface regions in the continental U.S. This is a core component of the climate engineering agenda. No matter how far into meltdown the planet is as a whole, the weather makers know they only need to whip up a chemical cool down, and the vast majority forget all about the overall state of the planet, if they even knew or cared in the first place. The last time the climate engineers chemically flash froze Texas in February of 2021, it was 33 degrees warmer at the North Pole than it was in Dallas, Texas. While Dallas was below zero, it was 85 degrees and raining at almost the same latitude in Florida. And in this case, also, the moisture for the Dallas deep freeze came straight off the record warm Gulf of Mexico. Geoengineeringwatch.org desperately needs help with fully exposing the chemically engineered winter weather component of climate engineering operations. We can't do it alone. In regard to the chemical cooldowns, here's another headline to consider from AccuWeather. Florida beats Alaska seasonal snow after Gulf Coast snowstorm. The report states a snowstorm of historic proportions walloped the Gulf Coast this week, delivering travel-snarling snow from Texas to the Carolinas and breaking records that have stood for more than a century. Preliminary estimates for total damage and economic loss from the snow, ice, and extreme cold in the south is at $14 to $17 billion. They continue. Rumbles of rare thunder snow echoed near Lafayette, Louisiana, as heavy snow blanketed the region. It's not rare anymore, is it? Because they're chemically nucleating thunderstorms. In years past, decades past, there was no thunder snow, but now it's the norm. Just like baseball and softball size hail is the norm because they're chemically nucleating the cloud moisture, again, which starts the nucleating process much sooner at much higher temperatures, and you end up with massive hail and snow on the Gulf coasts. First, a recap of last week's super sensationalized headlines, the kind the climate engineers seek to create. And this isn't to say that the chemical cold isn't real. Damaging and deadly it is. In many cases, even more so than any natural cold event. Chemical cold is generally much more biting and penetrating. And there is the super slick aspect of surfactant-soaked chemical snow. It's almost impossible to drive in. Is that connected to the ever-increasing level of collisions during such events? You decide. From AccuWeather, exactly the kind of sensationalized media coverage the climate engineers and the controllers seek to create. First headline, biggest snowstorm in years shuts down travel across the southern U.S. Dallas, Atlanta, and Asheville were a handful of the southern U.S. cities that had their biggest snowstorm in years, which shut down travel across the region. Areas are still recovering from Hurricane Helene, and also now hit by snow and freezing chemical cold, record cold in some instances. Also from AccuWeather, travel disruptions possible as lake effect snow machine switches back on this week. That's exactly what it is. The climate engineers orchestrate atmospheric pressure zones, which creates zonal wind flows across the record warm Great Lakes. It's a giant atmospheric snow machine, complete with chemical ice nucleation. This AccuWeather report states a brisk pattern and lack of ice coverage across the Great Lakes, I just alluded to that, will commence yet another round of lake effect snow through at least midweek. And ongoing in places like Texas, Texas freeze sees meteorologists sound alarm, quote, dangerous situation, end quote. The report says the powerful Arctic cold front pushing across the country is causing temperatures in Texas to plunge, with warnings and cold weather advisories blanketing the states. Again, keep in mind, while it was raining in regions of the Arctic. The freezing temperatures can cause frostbite and hypothermia, as well as causing damage to crops, vegetation, and homes. Is that part of the plan? For all those that are still clinging to the notion that our government doesn't possess such weather modification technologies, or that it would not use them without asking for our permission first, time to wake up. Here's a rewind reminder of a 220 report from BusinessInsider.com. All other Matrix media sources covered this report as well. Here it is. China is massively expanding its weather modification program, saying it will be able to cover half the country in artificial rain and snow by 2025. I've covered this report before in this broadcast, but since the Gulf Coast freak flash snowstorm, this China report is more relevant than ever. And this question, is the massive and most funded military on the planet not able to do exactly the same and even more? Again, time to wake up. There's ice storms on the boundaries of these chemically nucleated events when they're pushing moisture off the record warm Gulf of Mexico and saturating that moisture again with chemical nucleating elements, endothermic reacting elements. There's typically a surface ice storm in the transition zone between liquid precipitation and when frozen types of material begin falling out of the sky. There's a surface flash freeze where this chemically nucleated material is reaching the surface before it sets up as ice. And does anyone even notice now that elevation is no longer a factor in these storms? You're either on the warm side of the quote winter storm or the cold side. Since when? Since climate engineering completely derailed the planet's natural life support systems, and about completely cutting off the rain, like what has been done to Southern California for almost an entire year before this weekend. Let's consider this 2021 report from the UK Guardian. China modified the weather to create clear skies for political celebration. The key takeaway here is, quote, create clear skies. Translation, eliminate clouds and rain, which, for the record, climate engineering operations are even more effective at than augmenting rain or creating chemically nucleated frozen material, aka oddly shaped various forms of frozen material that look nothing like naturally nucleated snowflakes. Composition is completely different as well. In the past, again, very different. And also frozen rain, softball-sized hail, you get the idea. Anyway, Southern California continued to be lahaina'd this week. The U.S. Gulf Coast and other regions of the U.S. were subjected to a chemical surface flash freeze, so-called Winter Storm Enzo. During much of the month of January, the monitoring of U.S. precipitation maps revealed that the weather makers were chemically nucleating everything everywhere in the lower 48. Day after day of almost no liquid precipitation could be seen. Only widely scattered flurries of chemically frozen material, followed by the expected matrix media sensationalized headlines. The patented chemical cloud seeding endothermic elements tend to dry up much of the available moisture in the process. Thus, the climate engineers' constant utilization of the moisture from the record-warm Great Lakes and the record-warm Gulf of Mexico. Any that listen to this broadcast are familiar with this 1962 quote from U.S. President Lyndon Johnson, quote, "He who controls the weather controls the world." Let's go back further, all the way to 1958, to this earlier quote, also from Johnson. Here it is. "From space, the masters of infinity could have the power to control the Earth's weather, to cause drought and flood, to change the tides and to raise the level of the sea, to divert the Gulf Stream and change temperate climates to frigid," end quote. Think about that, from 1958. Johnson declared this at the Democratic caucus in January 58, warning of the technological and scientific superiority of the Russians. Why are these quotes from so long ago so very important? Because Johnson clearly demonstrated a sense of paranoia and fear that matters might be beyond our control already, and that we must redouble our efforts to be in charge, aka to be the god of weather. That same paranoia and fear permeates the cancerous cabal that masquerades as the US government, which is actually orchestrated from behind the curtain. The rest is theater. Now fast forward to 1965, also from Johnson. Air pollution is no longer confined to isolated places. This generation has altered the composition of the atmosphere on a global scale through radioactive materials and a steady increase in carbon dioxide from the burning of carbon fuels. Entire regional airsheds, crop, plant environments, and river basins are already heavy with noxious materials, end quote. That's from February of 1965. Question, how bad is it now? The collapsing ecosystems around the world, forests to oceans, provide a clear answer. Our skies are constantly filled with climate engineering toxic filth on top of industrialized, militarized pollution. Lab testing indicates, regarding climate engineering and what it disperses into our atmosphere, something in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of toxic heavy metal and polymer nanoparticles is being dispersed annually. That's based on extrapolations from hundreds of rain tests over a single U.S. state. And yet, so many continue to pretend that elections matter more. But according to the world's most recognized climate engineering scientist, Dr. David Keith, nothing to worry about. Dr. Keith apparently believes that there's so much pollution in the atmosphere, a bit more won't hurt, even if that pollution from climate engineering is now aluminum nanoparticles. And for those who don't know, aluminum is toxic to all life forms, period, no exceptions. And the smaller the particle of aluminum, the more toxic it is. And we're talking about nanoparticles in relation to climate engineering. You can fit 100,000 across the width of a single human hair. They are completely bioavailable and bioaccumulative, and they are now falling through our breathable air column. Take the time to view the Geoengineering Watch documentary, The Dimming, and you can see Dr. David Keith say this for himself, that he felt dumping this into our atmosphere wouldn't be a problem. Would you agree with Dr. Keith's opinion that climate engineering is, to use the terms of another criminal industry, safe and effective? How's all that working out so far in both arenas of so-called science as our planet's life support systems continue to implode and the health of human populations plummets? This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass. I bring it up every week, and I'll continue to, because it's the only way forward in this fight, and this effort will take all of us. We must reach a critical mass of awareness, starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data is essential. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can be started easily with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our printed materials we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. As I state every week, also, I live for the day when the insanity in our skies is fully exposed and halted, and the planet allowed to respond on its own to to the damage already done. Please help us to sound the alarm. Moving on, here's a footnote climate engineering distraction headline from ecobusiness.com. Ban solar geoengineering. The report says youth activists demand a global ban on solar geoengineering, warning it's a dangerous distraction from real climate solutions and a generational betrayal. That sounds meaningful, doesn't it? But is it? No. Just propagating the false narrative that climate engineering is only a dangerous proposal that might happen someday. Alarmingly, many self-proclaimed truth-telling alternate media sites are taking the same position, pretending that it's just a proposal, that they're somehow doing something to stop by claiming a moratorium on something that's been ongoing for 75 plus years. How does that help in this fight? Answer, it doesn't. And there's this from theecologist.org. Climate impacts could wipe out profits. For the record, what should this headline be if it actually addressed the truth? Climate engineering, on top of all other forms of damage to the planet, will end life on Earth, even without nuclear everything, which is also likely coming. Back to the completely engineered winter weather warfare that has been waged on unknowing U.S. populations. The blatantness of the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations that were used to create the Gulf Coast flash freeze needs to be understood. Here's more sensationalized headlines on the subject from the climate engineering cover-up actors at the so-called AccuWeather source. Historic snow ice storm threatens gridlocks, major power outages from Texas to Florida. How is this not weather warfare, winter weather warfare? What possible benevolent motive could there be for those in power to carry out this kind of operation? Answer, there is no benevolent motive. It is purely malevolent. This report states travel near the Gulf Coast may be, quote, dangerous or impossible for days as rare winter storm with heavy snow and ice blasts areas from San Antonio and Houston, Texas to Jacksonville, Florida and Savannah, Georgia. Another from AccuWeather. First ever blizzard warning issued along Gulf Coast as historic winter storm blasts south. From WFTV Orlando. State of emergency continues as Florida receives record-breaking snowfall. Exactly the kind of headlines the controllers and the climate engineers are seeking. From that report, an Arctic blast storm has triggered a state of emergency in Florida. No, let's stop there. Not a, quote, Arctic blast, a chemical ice nucleation creation. Please search and review the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Some objective research is needed and necessary. Credibility is key if we're to successfully move this fight forward. A, quote, Arctic blast doesn't happen with moisture straight out of the record warm Gulf of Mexico. This is incredibly absurd. How can any meteorologist that has higher than a room temperature IQ not know this is going on? Of course they know. They're simply protecting their paychecks and pensions. Where is any sense of morality in this community and other so-called science communities that no one is willing to acknowledge this massively obvious elephant in the equation? The so-called environmental groups, so-called environmentally minded elected officials, none of them willing to tell the truth. None of them willing to risk their personal paradigm in order to protect their honor and their virtue. What a sad state of humanity this is. Here's more sensationalized headlines, and after these, I will get to current updates on the actual state of the planet. Next sensationalized report from AccuWeather. Again, climate engineering cover-up crew. Life-threatening cold weather to expand southward across the nation. The coldest air is so far this winter will plague the central and east coast again this week. Plunging temperatures below zero for an extended period of time. Residents from the northern plains to even the Gulf Coast will have noticeably colder conditions early to midweek. Dangerous temperatures, they say. Downright dangerous, they called it. From the Weather Channel, record-setting cold brings dangerous U.S. temperatures early week. From CBS News, polar vortex maps show where Arctic blast is set to freeze the U.S. as far as the deep south. Again, calling it the polar vortex with moisture straight out of the record warm Gulf of Mexico. They say that this polar vortex is dipping down from Siberia, where it's in places above freezing and raining. How does that work? From Detroit Free Press, heavy snow, dangerously low temperatures put more than 70 million under winter storm warnings. From Newsweek, Gulf Coast states brace for, quote, rare winter snow and ice threat. They say a rare winter storm named Winter Storm Enzo, set to bring snow and ice, sub-freezing temperatures. You know the rest. The storm, they say, could lead to significant disruptions, including treacherous travel conditions. Yeah, it does lead there, doesn't it? Surfactant-soaked snow. Does that have anything to do with those treacherous travel conditions? Power outages and infrastructure damage. Another from so-called AccuWeather. Arctic blasts could trigger rare frost quakes. They say cracks and booms may have people thinking they felt an earthquake during the upcoming Arctic outbreak, but the unusual phenomenon has roots in bitterly cold winter weather. How do we know what's triggering what at this point? When we know frequency transmissions are a massive part of the climate engineering equation from the clouds to the ground, and when we know frequency transmissions can cause a vibration or reverberation in strata that can cause seismic activity, how do we know what's connected to what at this point? We simply believe the, quote, experts that increasingly depart from any semblance of the truth? And how about the ever more extreme temperature swings? From Fox Weather, this weather whiplash, winter storm systems to sweep across east this weekend after warm temperatures. And from across the Atlantic, more winter weather warfare. New from BBC, emergency alert sent ahead of red weather warning. That report states an emergency alert has been sent to millions of people in Scotland ahead of a rare red weather warning. The Met Office, the meteorological office there, said Storm Eowyn could bring winds of 100 miles per hour, and there could be a risk to life due to flying debris, power cuts, and damage to buildings. So again, I pose this question. This is extremely important. How can there be any discussion of climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing the climate engineering issue? Whatever side of the state of the climate you're on, that's the bottom line, isn't it? That position's not really arguable. There can be no legitimate discussion of climate anything without first addressing climate engineering and its effects on the entire equation. And for the record, while the Matrix media super hype the snow-covered Gulf Coast beaches, polar ice is at the lowest levels ever recorded. Do we see any headlines about that? So are the chemical ice nucleation blizzards on the Gulf Coast in any way a reflection of the wider horizon? Definitely not. The planet is spiraling into total meltdown, with climate engineering further fueling the overall fire. Short-term toxic chemical cooldowns that come at the cost of an even worse overall warming. And we still get messages at geoengineeringwatch.org from people that claim somehow at some point I stated climate engineering was the only problem with the planet. Never. I challenge anybody to produce any statement I have ever made that fits that description. I never have, I never will. Here's what I have always stated from day one. Any form of human activity that affects the overall energy balance of the planet is a part of the problem. How can the planet not be affected by the burning of 26 million tons of coal every single day, over 100 million barrels of hydrocarbon every single day, cutting down the forest, paving the planet, poisoning the oceans? How can that not have an effect? Of course it does. It's extremely irrational to think that it doesn't, and somehow the planet only feels the consequences of climate engineering and nothing else. That's not a rational conclusion. It's imperative to remember that it's a this and that equation, all the above. What climate engineering has done it's prevented the planet from responding to all the other forms of damage. It's a straight jacket over the planet, and climate engineering is being used as a weapon, period. There's no question about that. We see a systematic targeting of many agricultural regions, urban regions, as we've seen of late. Whatever the agendas and objectives, and they're not hard to figure out for any that are looking through a clear lens, but whatever they are, the fact that these events are not natural is beyond rational dispute. From your weatherco.com, global temperature records shattered in 2024. Many sources have covered this. Please just look it up. And yes, we all love to hate Al Gore, but that doesn't change reality. Planet's in meltdown. Here's more. This one from the UK Guardian. Scientists confirmed 2024 as warmest year on record. And the last 10 years, all the warmest on record, each year shattering the previous year, and it's heading one direction only. Climate engineering and the kind of engineered winter weather warfare that just happened on the Gulf Coast is designed to mask the true severity of damage done to the planet, while paradoxically at the same time inflicting even more damage. WMO, World Meteorological Association, confirms 2024 is warmest year on record. Let's stop there. Of course, climate engineering has long since been deployed without public knowledge or consent. Think about it. Are the criminals going to openly announce their covert crimes so that populations can take to the streets with their proverbial pitchforks and torches? Of course not. And now this. Fire the meteorologists before they grow a spine and begin to speak out about climate engineering. New from Yahoo News, local TV meteorologists deliver tearful farewell as stations replace staff with the Weather Channel feed. The plan will see the locally produced segments replaced by a feed beamed to individual stations from the Weather Channel. There you have it. Yes, the controller-owned Weather Channel climate engineering cover-up actors will now officially pass down the scheduled weather scripts produced by private defense contractors, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, both of which are neck-deep in climate engineering everything. The narrative has to match, and that's what they're doing. They're tightening the noose so that the narrative matches before the meteorologists start to depart from the script. I recently did an interview with Vice News. I was recently interviewed by Vice News. And they have a huge social media platform. In fact, the Vice News YouTube channel is just under 10 million subscribers. I interviewed with Shane Smith, the CEO of Vice News. A full hour, a very productive and data-filled hour, which should have been a standalone interview, but Vice News chose to try to muddy the water by pulling in two, quote, debunkers after my segment. I would encourage everybody to watch this and decide for themselves who presented solid data and who didn't. You can go to the Vice News YouTube channel, easy to find. My segment was the first 17 or 18 minutes of a full hour that should have been aired on its own. And then a Harvard meteorologist behind me, and then a younger male that is part of some kind of weather modification. Decide for yourself who presented real data and who just said, oh, we all know this is a conspiracy theory, and left it at that with nothing to back up that conclusion. And that term is getting very old indeed, isn't it? It's the final fallback of cowards, the factless and the fearful. The term of shame is what it will soon be as we fully expose so many issues that have been so marginalized by those that didn't want to know the truth. Back to the burn downs, the kind that can only come when the rain has been completely cut off for almost a year, while entire regions are continuously covered in highly incendiary climate engineering fallout, again, for almost a year. Add extreme surface wind flows from manipulated atmospheric pressure zones, throw in a spark here and there. Perhaps get some extended play by random smart meter ignitions. You get the idea. From the LA Times, fire-weary LA faces more dangerous winds. Officials say they are prepared. This week's alert is an unprecedented fifth particularly dangerous situation enhancement to a red flag warning in a single season by the Weather Service. Well, there you have it. Yet another, quote, PDS scenario, the particularly dangerous situation. The acronym that the so-called experts, aka script readers, use to convince populations that engineered events are just nature behaving poorly. From the UK Guardian, we surpassed human limits to stop this. LA mega fires show our approach to fire needs to change. End of headline. Yes, it does need to change, starting with stopping the climate disruption operations, the single most destructive human activity of all. Please search the Engineering Wildfires section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org to learn much, much more, what few are yet willing to face. From the Bangkok Post, Brazil saw 79% jump in area burned by fires in 2024, says Monitor. Think about that. Amazon's done already. It's over. And yet it's burning faster than ever. The report says wildfires in Brazil last year consumed a total area larger than all of Italy. A Monitor reported, as the country continues to battle blazes often set by farmers and ranchers illegally expanding their territory. That's not the only problem. What's setting the template for these regions to burn with such ferocity? Again, when you completely derail and disrupt the entire hydrological cycle all over the planet, bad things happen. And then there are those that capitalize off those bad things with tropical forests that now readily burn. They burn them because they can. This report continues. There were 140,328 fires detected by satellite imaging over the year. That's according to the National Institute for Space Research. Scientists warn that continued deforestation will put the Amazon on track to reach a point where it will emit more carbon than it absorbs, accelerating climate change, aka abrupt climate collapse. Let's call it what it is. And all of it being further fueled by climate engineering. But wait, what about this 2021 report from the UK Guardian and many other sources? Amazon rainforest now emitting more CO2 than it absorbs. Let's translate that. When we have scientists today saying we might reach a point where the Amazon becomes a carbon source and not a carbon sink, and we have an article from 4 years ago stating that's already the case, somebody's not telling the truth. The Brazilian Amazon has been transformed by fires and deforestation into a net emitter. This is from the 2021 article of carbon dioxide. Net emitter rather than a sink. For the record, the same has long since been true with boreal forests in the northern hemisphere, which are even bigger than the Amazon. No surprise for any of it. If the current reality just keeps getting worse, just lie about it. Pretend that bad things might happen someday when in fact the boundaries have long since been breached. Same is true with the ozone layer. It's disintegrating. And yet we're told, pay no attention to how intense the sun feels on your skin, how hot your car gets and surfaces get. Pay no attention to any of that. The ozone layer is getting better. Trust us. Move along. And people ignore their own God-given senses in exchange for a lie. I and Geoengineeringwatch.org have stated on the record for a decade and a half that climate engineering would be the factor that turns our forests from carbon sinks to carbon sources. Now it's being admitted to because they can no longer hide it. In regard to the complete altering of Earth's former atmospheric chemistry in the geologic blink of an eye, many have been falsely convinced that if something is necessary for life, that more is better, no matter the consequences. But this isn't the truth. There is so much more to the equation. Consider that water is the most fundamental component in the web of life. Question, how long can any air-breathing organism live if submersed underwater for an extended time? How well would our crops do if they were drowned under only a few inches of water for an extended time? Again, complexities must be considered. The human race has, again, in the geologic blink of an eye, completely and toxically altered atmospheric chemistry. How well is that going so far? Where does this road lead if we remain on the current course? How many are actually willing to face the full truth on that question without turning away? You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 494, January 25th, 2025. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. Every week, I will express my deepest gratitude to all those that are courageously marching forward in this fight. And it does take courage when you're rejected by family, friends, and everyone else that doesn't want to face the truth. But those that are courageously sharing the truth should take solace in the fact that all the seeds they sow will be forced to sprout sooner than later as unfolding events rip heads from the sand. All will be forced to face the truth, like it or not. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email, directly from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. And in spite of that censorship, thanks to all of you, The Dimming is over 25 million views right now and climbing. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment. All of this helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. Again, about reaching those that still aren't looking up. Start a conversation. Geoengineeringwatch.org awareness-raising materials can help a great deal with that. They can be found on our homepage. Again, our only goal, provide activists what they need to move this fight forward. Extremely high quality printed materials, shocking images, pictures worth 1,000 words, as the proverb goes. We pass these printed materials on again, less than our cost of producing and shipping. We have Geoengineering Watch hoodies, shirts, photos of both on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers. All of these are effective tools to strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue, and that is the first key to the door. Again, reaching a critical mass. Only way forward in this fight. It is the great imperative. If we can expose it, we have a chance of stopping it from the inside out, as one would hope that as we awaken our military brothers and sisters and defense industry families, that they realize they're participating in their own demise. The demise of, in fact, the entire planet. Nothing benevolent in these operations. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, ideally in some crowded location, please send us your photos so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation. That's part of our materials page. The images encourage others to stand up and make their voices heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm. Again, to those that are steadfastly committed to exposing and halting climate engineering, you have my deepest gratitude forever. Moving on from Newsweek, map shows California is under both freeze and red flag fire warnings. Imagine that. In fact, this has happened in places like Yellowstone Park, where it's snowing in one part of the park and wildfires in the other part. You think that's normal? Because it's not. Manipulated incinerations and chemical flash freezes. Welcome to weather warfare. A quick consideration of the wider horizon. India and China spiraling into water wars. Dams, weather modification, all of it is continuing to fuel global tensions and conflicts and being used as a weapon of war, just the way the controllers like it, aka the money printers. On that note, here's two random headlines that are, I'm sure, completely unrelated. Or are they? First, rewind to this recent report from the Jerusalem Post. Ireland's anti-Israel actions will not go unanswered. Well, that sounded a bit ominous, didn't it? Next, this new report from AccuWeather. Generational bomb cyclone to slam Ireland. It's just a coincidence, I'm sure. Nothing to see here. Move along. I'm sure the same was true about what happened in Spain, who also didn't agree with certain international policies of certain countries. And the same with Dubai. And there's Hurricane Otis in Mexico that came around the time of certain political tensions. All just coincidences, I'm sure. Here's another footnote. Numerous online sources posting about, quote, chemtrails, which for the record is a very unhelpful term unless you want to be instantly disregarded and marginalized by any official source, media, or elected official. Anyway, about the sources that use the chemtrails term, many also mistakenly post a photo of a firefighting jet aircraft belly dump of water, as if that has anything whatsoever to do with climate engineering atmospheric spray dispersions, which it doesn't. And thus, this photo is very discrediting to the critically important battle of exposing and halting geoengineering operations. We're playing a grand game of chess. All is in the balance. We need to learn how to play well. So, how bad is it? Not only the weather warfare, but the toxic fallout, which we all get to inhale with every breath we take. It's in our water, It's in our food. An ongoing and expanding issue. From Medium.com, the invisible threat in the polycrises, anthropogenic particles and the human body. Anthropogenic particles, aka man-made, are the invisible remnants of humanity's industrial age, and they are everywhere. They're also climate engineering fallout, which none of these sources will admit to. But they continue, from microplastics in seafood and tap water to airborne particles detected in remote mountain air. They're detected everywhere. There's not an uncontaminated drop on planet Earth, period. Peer-reviewed study has proved that, not just with climate engineering fallout, but with PFAS, forever chemicals, which may also be connected to climate engineering fallout when you don't know what to look for and when the mix is likely always changing because there's nothing to stop them from changing it. No regulations, no environmental impact reports. They do whatever they want because they can. That's the benefit of being the ones who print the money. You control everything. Government agencies, media, you control the narrative, everything. That's the situation we're in. The report then states these pollutants have infiltrated every corner of the planet. No ecosystem, no living being remains untouched. These particles, a product of our addiction to convenience and climate engineering, are emblematic of the larger polycrises which spans the interconnected emergencies of climate change, aka abrupt climate collapse, biodiversity loss, and resource overshoot. We are neck deep in the sixth great mass extinction on planet Earth, and I mean neck deep. On the current trajectory, none of us will be here much longer if we do not change course. The report then says microplastic, synthetic fibers, heavy metals, and chemical residues contaminate the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil we depend on. They travel vast distances carried by winds and currents. They're also dispersed from geoengineering jet aircraft, embedding themselves in even seemingly pristine environments like the Arctic ice or the Mariana Trench, deepest spot in all of Earth's ocean. Forests that once served as carbon sinks are now scarred by industrial fallout, their canopies laced with toxic particles, also their foliage being burnt by intense UV radiation from the disintegrating ozone layer, which climate engineering is the core causal factor. Please search the ozone destruction section on the geoengineeringwatch.org homepage. You will not like what you find there. Interviews with a former NASA contract engineer that worked with geoengineeringwatch.org with the state-of-the-art equipment we supplied him at the cost of into well over 5 figures. And that news is beyond dire. If we had no other challenges but the disintegrating ozone layer, again, which climate engineering is the core causal factor for, that by itself, extremely near-term existential threat. Final excerpt from this report. This pervasive contamination, referring to the nanoparticles, is no accident. That's true. It stems from unchecked industrial growth, a relentless pursuit of profit, and a societal addiction to convenience. Over the past century, industries have churned out synthetic materials and chemical compounds at an unprecedented scale with little regard for their consequences. The power structure themselves do not consider the consequences of their actions even to themselves. That's from clinical psychological analysis. We're not dealing with sanity. And the vast majority continue to go about their lives as if their lives are going to continue as they have been. For the record, what was will very soon no longer be. Here's a polar update. The planet's air conditioners are broken. Climate engineering is making it far worse overall, not better. No surprise. From mediarelations.edu, research finds frozen ground in the Arctic is sinking at an increased rate. It's because the permafrost is melting. But no big deal, right? Because it's a blizzard in New Orleans. The report says a new study from George Washington University shows frozen ground is sinking at an alarming rate at high latitude and high-altitude cold regions of the Arctic. The study, based on the diverse data from regions across North America and Eurasia, found that thaw subsidence, sinking, unsettling of frozen ground, known as permafrost, is widespread and happening at an accelerating rate, with serious implications, including ecosystem infrastructure and landscape disruptions. In addition, wildfires and human activities. Please search Siberian methane craters to get the real picture. If you haven't seen those, look at the images. Siberian methane craters looks like nuclear bomb detonations. That's methane deposits thawing and literally exploding into the atmosphere. And the gravity of that, the threat posed by that, cannot be overstated. It's happening on the seafloor as well. Blue ocean event perhaps coming, perhaps at both poles. And this will be the fastest rate of environmental collapse in the planet's history by far. It's so incredibly near. What is a blue ocean event? It means when summer ice from the polar regions is statistically gone. And when that happens, instead of the ice reflecting 90% of the sun's incoming thermal energy, the water, the dark water, absorbs 90%, so the heating goes exponential. This means a feedback loop is triggered. The heating releases more methane on the seafloor, which migrates through the water column and into the atmosphere. The methane disperses into ever wider regions, covering the planet like a layer of glass. For those that don't know, methane over a 10-year time horizon is 120 times more potent at trapping greenhouse gas and CO2. There's also nitrous oxide. So again, it's a feedback loop. The more heating that occurs, the more methane that's released, which causes more heating, which releases more methane. That's one of about 50 feedback loops that's ongoing. Climate engineering in the attempt to mask the severity of damage done to the planet and these feedback loops by events like the Gulf Coast freak flash snowstorm with the blizzards in New Orleans is only further fueling the overall problem, only radically increasing the overall damage done to the planet. It is pounding the nails, the final nails, into our collective coffins. That's why it must be exposed and halted before the planet's life support systems are completely and totally dysfunctional. Occupants of the White House, no matter their political stripe, are nothing more than actors in the orchestrated divide and conquer political theater. The core policies of empire remain the same: loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute until nothing is left, literally. This week, Mr. Trump stated, quote, "The golden age of America begins now," end quote. Consider and remember that, quote, with increasingly suffering populations all over the world struggling to survive on a rapidly dying planet, and no, Biden wasn't better. I'll get to that. But as the coming weeks and months unfold, remember that quote from Mr. Trump: "The golden age of America begins now." By the end of 2025, if we get that far, ask yourself if there was a shred of truth or reality in that statement. From Bloomberg, Trump to declare national energy emergency, unlocking new powers. From that report, in his inaugural address this week, Trump stated, quote, "The U.S. boasts the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it." He continues, "We will be a rich nation again, and it's that liquid gold under our feet that will help us to do it," end quote. Among other plans is an executive order specifically targeting natural resource production in Alaska, which is blessed with an abundance of oil, gas, and critical minerals. Trump is prepared to compel policy shifts that would enable new oil and gas development on federal lands. Trump stated, quote, "America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and will have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have: the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we're going to use it," end quote. Mr. Trump finished with this quote: "We will drill, baby, drill," end quote. No surprise. Wow, what a great idea. As the whole of the human race and the entire web of life is hurtling toward imminent impact at full velocity, aka the collapse of everything everywhere all at once, let's put the pedal to the metal. Loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute till virtually nothing is left, and all the while pretending it's all going to magically work out with climate engineering raging in our skies. We just need to keep blindly waving our flags in full support of whatever actor occupies the White House. Again, for the record, the true controllers, aka the money printers, are behind the curtain, not blasting their bullhorn from the biggest stage they can find. And also for the record, the U.S. uses the most oil by far. Does anyone believe countries in the Middle East helped us out with the oil we needed because they love us so much for leveling their countries? How much oil does the U.S. consume compared to other countries? About 30% more than China, and about 300% more than India. Take a moment to contemplate that. And in regard to the subject of drill, baby, drill, was the Biden puppet regime any different? Short answer, no, of course not. From Politico.com, Biden administration oil drilling permits outpaced Trump. From that report, President Joe Biden approved nearly 50% more oil and gas drilling permits for wells in federal land than former President Donald Trump. This was before he took office again this year. Neither Biden or Trump is ultimately making the major decisions. That's done by the money printers. And when anybody tries to draw a line in the sand, the last one to do it, JFK, lived about a week after he did. No one has tried since. All theater. Yes, meet the new boss. Same as the old boss. The rest, divide, distract, and polarize the population's scripted political theater. Here's a snapshot of the wider horizon. Weather warfare continues to compound countless other sources of anthropogenic damage to the planet. Runaway climate and environmental collapse is now. From IFLscience.com and many other sources, 2024 was the hottest year in recorded history, unleashing, quote, misery for millions of people. It's just the beginning. From France24.com, overshoot as planet crosses 1.5°C global warming limit. Can we still reverse course? Question mark. If only that was all that's happened. Based on unfiltered frontline data, we are likely past 3.5 degrees C of warming now. We are in totally uncharted territory. The report then says, geoengineering could provide a solution to reverse the trend and lower the temperatures. Really? How's that going so far? They then say no going back, even in a scenario where the carbon capturing technology worked perfectly, which is so far from any reality. The climate and the world would never be the same as before, end quote. That's from the report. How many times have I said that? We will never know the planet we have formerly known. If we are lucky, we can salvage some part of the planet's remaining life support systems so that someone might make it through what's coming. And that's worth fighting for, period. No occupant of the White House is going to halt the weather warfare. It's up to us. As the proverb goes, we are the ones we've been waiting for. I have had now former friends and family tell me that to hope for an end to the current paradigm of total planetary decimation is sick and twisted, because in their view, they would rather sacrifice any chance of any future for anyone or anything in order to keep their personal pursuits of pleasure going, the paradigm of loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute just a bit longer. It seems that keeping the status quo till the brutal bitter end is all that matters to them. The power structure program paradigm of temporarily pursuing personal pleasures, the get it while you can before it's all gone mentality at the cost of mathematically certain near-term planetary omnicide, aka no one gets out alive, and we take the entire completely innocent web of life down with us. For myself, I would gladly live in a teepee and subsist off acorns if I could exist on a functional, living planet. Far too many in the ranks of the human race have long since abandoned any connection to the natural world on which all of our lives completely and totally depend. If the current course is continued, the story can only end poorly, and soon, far sooner than almost any yet dare to imagine. This very grim conclusion is 100% based on verifiable data. It isn't conjecture. A horizon this dark can be completely debilitating if you allow it to be, but only if you allow it to be. I could never count or recall all the moments during the last 20 plus years of endless slogging in this battle that I felt compelled to lay down at the foot of my silent, sentient forest friends, the trees, and to abandon this endlessly arduous battle which has alienated all former family and friends. But I can't give up. I won't. To each and every individual that sees and feels the cancer of the collective insanity which has delivered us to this dark hour in which we now find ourselves, please don't give up. Please search within, summon your courage, refuse to go silently into the night. As I've tried to remind so many times, the hallmark of a healthy mind is the unyielding willingness to fully face the truth head on, no matter how dire the truth may be. Only in this way do we stand any chance of making a difference at this late hour. No one, absolutely no one, can take our God-given will. This has been entrusted to each of us to use honorably, morally, virtuously. We must never forget this. No one can know with certainty exactly how the coming weeks and months will unfold, but great changes and challenges are here and will accelerate rapidly. But no matter what comes, if we are each found at our appointed posts doing our best to do our best when our individual part in the play ends, what story could end better than that? And if enough of us fully face the wider horizon, if enough of us do our best to effectively and efficiently sound the alarm, if we can reach a critical mass of awareness in the population before the planet's remaining life support systems are completely and irreparably broken, we may yet alter the outcome in the right direction. We're playing a grand game of chess. We must learn to play well. Please check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please make your voice heard. Make absolutely every single day count. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.